So now we're going to jump onto respiration. I'm tangled. What do I do here? Okay. Respiration. All right, what do we already know? We did cruise over that a little bit.
Same root as respite.
Rest. Mm-hmm. And even deeper in there. Spire. Inspire. Expire. Yep.
So you got your lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Got your trachea, got your larynx.
Yep.
You got your sinuses. You got your mouth and your nose. Your bronchial tubes. Your cilia. The cilia. Helps you vocalize. Not the cilia, but the respiratory system.
What helps you vocalize?
Your vocal cords. Your vocal cords.
Vocal cords. Yep.
Smell. Your sense of smell is tied to the respiratory system.
Yeah, the nose is in there.
Oh, we wrote those already.
Oh yeah, we did. We did.
Catching up.
Here we are, dropping back in. This book has almost nothing for us about the respiratory system. I'm gonna only talk through this one. Okay. All right. How about the order of it? Let's start at the very top. What is the journey of a little bit of oxygen trying to get into your airway?
I like to breathe in through my nose.
Okay.
It goes past those little hairs in there, filtering out the big messy stuff that you don't want in your body.
Number one. Okay. Then what?
Goes
We
up
might
into your
also have
sinuses,
one.
right?
So we'll give ourselves running through the nose, the pharynx, actually. So we've got the pharynx, and specifically the nasal pharynx here. Pharynx. It's very... Yep.
Bottle stops. It passes by that little dangly thing.
Glottis, yeah. Passes by there, absolutely.
Which can help
Glottis.
you shape. What can that do? Shape sounds. Well, anyways. Glottis goes down your trachea.
Yeah.
Your past your uvula.
We're gonna actually also hit the larynx here. This is the same. As a kind of alongside the vocal cords there. We'll match that up. Yep, past the uvula.
And anyway, down into your lungs and your bronchial tubes.
We got the you guys said trachea already.
Diaphragm.
Yeah.
All the way down to the diaphragm.
6. And then exactly, if the particle of air makes it to the very lowest possible regions of the lungs, it may get pretty close to the diaphragm. But wherever in the lungs it may be swept into, it's definitely going to have a big impact from the diaphragm. So you guys are pretty solid on that, on the order of operations here. We've got these ideas of the passage. It's a pretty closed passage. It's just dropping in, dropping out. And before we dive into the kind of interior structure of the lungs, I do want to hit what is going on with the diaphragm and make sure that you guys have a visual of why the diaphragm is so impactful. So let me look this up real quick. Check in with your diaphragm. Take a few breaths. What can you know about the diaphragm from what's inside of you already?
Feels like a muscle. Feels like a strong muscle that can push the air out and help draw the air in. Like makes a little void that makes room for the lungs to expand.
Yes, a void that makes room for the lungs to expand. Can we picture the shape of the diaphragm?
Well, if it looks like a birth control device, it's a hammock kind of thing. Kind of round.
Yeah. Round hammock kind of thing. Okay. What does it need to be able to do for where it is?
It needs to be able to move. It needs to be kind of elastic. Kind of be flexible.
Very. Because there's stuff crossing through, right? We've got the digestive system has to clear to the other side. We've got the aorta has to clear to the other side, right? So we've got material that's going to have to find its way through the diaphragm, although it's like a roundish, kind of hammocky shape, right? You can think of it almost like an umbrella that is actually fully attached all the way around those lower ribs. So it is quite diaphragm-ish. Yes. So I've got an image here. This is from the side. We've got the diaphragm. So you can tell it's pretty tall, dropping all the way down below those lowest ribs and all the way up into the sternum. So feel that difference on yourself.
So right around here.
Yep, it's attaching right inside on the inside of the ribs there, and also right on the inside at the lowest ribs, which are, you can notice, are quite a bit lower. Yeah. Down into the low back.
Is it DI or DY?
DIA.
There is nothing in this book that has it.
So when you get suplexed or you fall off a seesaw and you stab yourself, as you do, then that's what's getting hit. It's not your lungs, because your lungs are protected by your rib cage.
Yes.
Like wind gets knocked out of you. It's the diaphragm.
Yes, the diaphragm actually can get thrown into spasm with that impact. Yeah.
Is it involved with hiccups?
Yep.
Your heart hurts constantly from hiccups. Is like something misaligned, or like just? So that's something I get, or I used to have. I would get hiccups and it would really badly hurt my heart. It was like having a heart attack.
Yeah. Sometimes, like when the digestive system is a little bit thrown and you're having like heartburn, basically, that feels like it's in that region, but it can be like really, it doesn't feel super digestive at times. Yeah. And that imbalance can also be affecting the diaphragm, where the diaphragm's kind of trying to like massage the organs nearby it and maybe help them straighten out. Yeah. Okay. So this is our sagittal image, yeah. So we've got the side, and here's our transverse image, and this is actually looking up into the rib cage, as though there was a tiny photographer like diving into your belly button and doing a sky shot. So looking up inside the rib cage, we've got...
Is the diaphragm a muscle or a membrane or a...
It is a muscle, yeah, and it is pretty powerful. It is a powerful muscle. Although...
How do those systems get through it? Are there chambers and passageways?
Exactly. Yeah. So you'll be able to see there's a vena cava foramen. So that's the big vein that's returning from the lower part of the body, has to pass through there. The esophageal hiatus, where the esophagus actually drops through the diaphragm back here. We've got the abdominal aorta running pretty close to the spine. So that's the blood flow descending from the heart, fully loaded. It's going to show us the lumbar vertebrae, so we have a relationship with the spine there and can get that orientation. And then we've got some of these major muscles that are lying really close to the spine, right at that intersection of the base of the diaphragm. You're going to be hitting the psoas major and the quadratus lumborum. Super close. So it's actually attaching across all of those with some connective tissue really intersected. This means that when people are having muscular dysfunction of these muscles, it can impact their breathing.
Oh, Lord.
It can also go the other way around, where if their diaphragm is underdeveloped or basically out of shape for whatever reason, it can really settle into a position where back pain is getting triggered by the dysfunction of the breath pattern. So these relationships here are almost always going to be both ways. If you have body parts touching each other in there, they're going to have some kind of impact that goes both directions, okay? So as major, quadratus lumborum, those are the big muscles that are of relevance nearby the diaphragm. And then the diaphragm itself is organized by this central tendon, and it's almost more like an aponeurosis, which is like a flat sheet kind of tendon, but it's basically suspended in the middle. So this is a really unusual muscle. You can see the fibers are radiating out from the tendon into their attachment points in bone all the way around. There is no bone in the middle. And so it's actually jumping with muscle fiber, muscle cells, into a tendon, which is like this particular one is very multi-directional. There's like fibers running every which way in that connective tissue. And then this pressure is having to jump across muscle fiber again. So if you think about the potential dysfunction of any muscle fiber that we've already kind of covered, and you apply that to the possibility that any of these muscle fibers in this complete radial pattern throughout the middle of the torso could have spasms, hypertension, some kind of loss of tone or increase of tone, coordination problems. Any things that can happen to a muscle can happen anywhere in that radial position around the diaphragm. So again, we have this like enormous power in co-opting our subconscious operation of breath, because the muscle of the diaphragm is operable consciously, right? And so all of our motor function that we can take conscious control of, we can grab there. But it's also going to be so automated if we're not taking control of it. It's going to do its best, but it's also going to repeat patterns. So if you're going around in your life like loaded with cortisol, kind of protecting, hunched over, collapsing the rib cage where the whole lung amount of space that is given over to the lungs is like being kind of collapsed, and the diaphragm is like or even worse, and you'll see this a ton, the diaphragm is relatively deactivated and the neck muscles are attempting to create the vacuum in the chest cavity by lifting the upper ribs, the clavicle, and the shoulder blades. Yeah, this is super sympathetic. This is what's going to happen when you have to go really fast across, and you can't take the time to really fill the capacity, but that is going to gradually really hit the amount of oxygen available to the brain, right? So really activating the full range of capacity of the diaphragm is going to exercise it just like any other muscle. It's going to build coordination and strength in that entire area. And so your capacity to take in oxygen through the lungs is super dependent on this diaphragm muscle action. Got that? Any questions?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Let me try to word it well. If you're coming in and you're elderly for a massage, is obviously over time all muscles kind of, if you're weakened, atrophy.
Atrophy is the term.
Atrophy.
Yeah.
What does the diaphragm physical space do when it's in that older state? Like, does it have less capacity to expand? I'm just trying to visualize that.
Yeah. So as the muscle weakens, which is more from underuse than from age, you can find people who are 95 years old who are still quite active and have good muscle tone, good recovery time, good oxygenation. But that when people, it's almost more correlated to when people settle into a sedentary lifestyle than how actually old they are, right? But that you start getting that kind of collapse of the chest cavity, and that you'll see especially in older people that have been more still for quite some time. Maybe they've been in a recliner for a long time now, and the actual chest cavity is collapsing. Remember, the bones are always reforming. The connective tissue is always reforming. So the physical space available to the lungs will actually decrease as people use them less and less. On the flip side, activating that diaphragm and forcing it to achieve a higher level of coordination will unfold people back out. One of my really impactful cases that I got to work with was this gentleman. He had grown really fast. Every once in a while this happens with guys that is very uncommon in women, but from time to time you see it in men, where the rate of spinal growth is so fast at the tail end of their developmental growth period. They're maybe gaining 4, 5, 6 inches in a really short period of time, a year and a half, right? So it's just not enough time for the connective tissue inside of the chest cavity to fully adjust and address that. So this gentleman at 19 years old had collapsed the left lung purely out of his growth rate, just dropped the upper lobe of the left lung, and continued to grow, and within another 6 months collapsed a different slice of the right lung. Then continued to grow. So unfortunately, this guy had this very impactful sequence of events that had him pretty laid up, not able to activate his lungs at their full capacity, and damaged his ability to stimulate the growth in the skeleton into the formation that would be the most structurally appropriate in the window where he was still very actively growing. And so he had finalized a skeletal shape where the shoulder girdle, upper clavicle, upper ribs were quite distorted. And so this impacted, it's such a cycle where the distortion impacted his comfort using his lung capacity, and the discomfort kind of inhibited him from restructuring the skeletal impact of that. And so time went by. And fortunately, like, he was such a cool guy. He was like very proactive and very like aware on a lot of levels. And while his embodiment had gotten kind of like disrupted by these really traumatic experiences, he had cognitively understood and accepted that like he needed to challenge his lungs, that his lung capacity was going to be less than other people's, and that he would have a fairly miserable life if he just accepted that and laid back, that he needed to push himself. So he was actually a very avid runner.
Oh, wow.
And had spent most of his adult life like just taking off for 8 miles here and there, and really like built that into his psychological management system, and like maintain this pretty high level of health. So by the time that I had him on my table, he was distorted but strong. And so it was really just the coordination that we really needed to dial in and zoom in on. And so we spent a lot of time actually just finding the locations in the diaphragm that were the glitchiest coordination inhibitions, and finding ways to get his conscious control of his breath expansion to be more regulated and even and symmetrical. And he took that home. He did all the homework, and like, would finish up a run, and while he was as activated as possible, as tuned in and aware as possible, he would spend the time just like really retraining those muscle fibers and developing coordination. And he actually like got so much shift in the like collapsed torsion of his spine and the like alignment of his shoulders over the course of the like, I don't know, maybe 8 months I was working with him pretty intensively. And he was getting like oxygen reads back that he had never seen in his life, like that his capacity had gone up. He was feeling, much more cognitive clarity. He was able to be more helpful at home. His relationships were improving. His like, just across the board in life, the impact of identifying that coordination issue and really going after that and maximizing the potential that was still there in the life of his body. Super impressive. Like, and so that's a big part of what I'm talking about when I say like it's not really us healing them, it's just us guiding them through their own bodies to where they need to heal themselves, right?
Over time, did the cartilage that was like taking so long to fill in, it started to appear or
Yes.
grow, but it was misaligned.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at least you had it then, so you could start to work with it.
Exactly, yeah. And cartilage is not the fastest tissue, but it is responsive tissue, and it will restructure, reform, all those places where we have those collagen fibers. Like, collagen fibers are really little. They can just like pop. And so like if you have extra ones that you don't need, they'll just pop, and they'll keep relaying, and they'll align, and they'll align, and they'll align.
Wow, that's really good to know about that like age range too. That can,
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. At the time that I was working with him, he was 40 some, so he had spent half of his life in that state. Yeah, super proud of him.
Awesome. That's a good
Okay.
story.
Thank you. So that is the diaphragm, our big guns of the respiratory system in terms of the impact that we can have on it. And that will be, like, you can access the diaphragm somewhat to just dive into the practical application as body workers. You can actually massage the diaphragm to some extent. It's a little fragile in terms of, like, the client's comfort being a little bit of, like, a strategy challenge to get in there effectively. But hopefully you'll get some of that in your hands-on process, but also just the breath work, just the guidance of like you'll be able to feel from the outside where the diaphragm is expanding the rib cage asymmetrically, And basically asking a person to follow your hand with their breath is going to force them to activate more conscious awareness of the way that their diaphragm is operating. And then, of course, those muscles that are running along the spine really nearby to that intersection, the quadratus lumborum and the psoas, you will probably learn hands-on techniques to get directly into those. They're kind of cool access points where you'd go actually through the abdomen to some extent for each of them, to really get at those interior fibers. So that's the diaphragm. Yay. Make friends with your diaphragm. Love your diaphragm every day. It works really hard for you. And it doesn't stop. We're really on those, the muscles, the heart and the diaphragm. That,
Okay, Mamma Mia. Oh,
ooh, what did it do? That little chair. I've fallen off of it so many times. Yeah.
the wheels joint just popped.
Didn't let me wheel me around there. In that water.
Wait.
Okay. So we've got some mechanics of breathing, some pulmonary airway stuff to do. So you guys already described for me how we're coming in from the trachea. We're dropping into the lungs. Let's just take one lung, but you know they're both sides there. So the trachea is going to branch into the bronchi. This will be the tracheobronchial tree. Okay. And lining up pretty close to here is going to be this interchange where there's arteries and there's veins that are coordinating directly from the heart that are kind of operating this region, okay? And you can get into some much more specific and detailed illustration, but for the concept of what exactly the lungs are doing. The lungs are basically these big sheer chambers. What's inside them? You guys have a concept of?
The branching bronchia tubes and
Yeah. The bronchus, bronchioles, and going into the terminal bronchiole. So the bronchii are going to be these tubes. And again, we're back at our like tree of life situation where they're starting out wider and then they're diffusing out. They're getting finer and finer throughout the lungs, etc. And the terminal point of every bronchiole is going to be the alveolus. Alveolus. That's one of them. Alveoli. Yeah. That's just an I. It's not an L. Okay. So the alveolus is basically the actual like chamber where the gases are exchanging. So this has to be a continuous open pathway through the bronchi into the alveoli in order to flow the air that's coming in and out of the lungs, right? And then the alveoli themselves are actually wrapped in capillaries individually. So there's going to be the veins and the arteries. Where did my blue one go? Oh, there we go. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is they're going to actually be reversed here of how we would normally illustrate them, because veins and arteries are defined by their directional flow with the heart, whether they're carrying blood away from the heart or carrying blood returning to the heart. So in this case, our pink lines are going to be the veins, because the oxygenated blood is coming off of the alveolar chambers there. Does that make sense? And so the lungs will be supplied with deoxygenated blood throughout. And then as the capillaries there charge with the oxygen from the alveoli, then they're gonna become oxygenated and kind of branch back up into the cardio system, circulatory system.
So what I'm learning is that there are blood vessels within the lungs.
Yes. Yes. Totally
They follow
diffused.
the same pathway as the brachii to get there.
They do kind of wind down the brachia, yeah. But it's super diffuse. Like, these are super, super fine. So again, we're into a region where the cell walls, or where the tissue walls on the alveoli are about 1 cell thick. So the alveoli are able to bring the gas across to them. And again, the capillary walls are also about 1 cell thick. And so the external air that hits the alveoli here, we're going to end up having like osmosis of the oxygen jumping through. It really only has to clear 2 cells to now be in the bloodstream and get grabbed by those red blood cells and loaded onto those hemoglobins. Okay. And then also we're going to be dropping off the carbon dioxide and squishing that back into the alveoli so it can ride back out on the next exhalation. And the lungs are totally dense with alveoli. Like, if you cut one open, it is like a pink foam, because it's just kind of like lightly diffusedly supplied with blood throughout, and so you've got the like perceptible redness of the hemoglobin, but it's like teeny fine bubbles basically that are all the way through this material. So to the naked eye, it would be kind of difficult to track the flow of either the vasculature or the airflow coming in and out with respiration. So we would look at that with dyes. Usually we'd have to like get it to mark
that
up.
the body thing?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the body exhibits.
I think that's the lungs, right?
Yeah.
There.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always like to tell my, like sometimes I work with younger clients and I'm like trying to get them to really activate their lungs, and I'll describe like you're going into like a bubblegum forest and you're in among the trees, but all of the trees are like blooming out in these like pink bubbles, and you're just pushing yourself through the like wild woods of these bubbles, right? So that's kind of fun. So that's the big concept there of what's going on with this gas exchange. Does that make sense? So the pulmonary veins coming into the lungs away from the heart, right, are the deoxygenated blood supply, or are the oxygenated blood supply. These are the veins going away from the lung. Does that make sense? Did I just scramble your head?
The veins are oxygenated.
The veins are oxygenated in the lungs. Thank you. Yes, and the arteries are the deoxygenated components there.
So it's counterintuitive to what we've learned so far.
Yes. So that is of note to grab that. So alveolus, alveoli, alveolus and capillaries, they're really hugging up against each other so that we can get that gas exchange jumping right over it. 350 million alveoli per lung. If you unwrapped all of that, you'd end up with like 60 to 80 square meters of surface. So that's really the point of all of these alveoli, is that you want as much surface area as possible in order to achieve this gas exchange. And so it's a super compact, highly intelligent set of tissue in order to allow the most air to hit the most tissue simultaneously. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. The lung does not have like muscle inside of it. It really is fully operating on the way that it rests onto the diaphragm. And so as the diaphragm contracts because of this central tendon, when these fibers are shortening, that's actually going to pull the central tendon down and create a vacuum that demands the lung to drop into a larger spatial area. And then when this muscle relaxes, it allows the lung to deflate and release oxygen, or release the CO2 back into the atmosphere and kind of complete that exchange so that we can move into the next part of the cycle again. Okay?
I had a test one time to test my lung function, and the test result was that I am not exhaling enough.
Yes. Yes.
How do you build up your ability to exhale?
Right.
All you're doing is relaxing your...
This is a great question. So exactly, the diaphragm as the driver of respiration is really empowered to create more expansion in the lungs, but as you're observing, you can't really push air out of the lungs from the diaphragm. So the pushing is happening because the rib cage is wrapping all around this whole situation. And what are the ribs called?
Oh,
Ribs.
what are the ribs called?
What are ribs called?
Bones?
Bones?
Anterior parts of the thorax.
Good, yes.
Oh.
Keep circling.
They can be costal, they can have cartilage, or they can
Right.
be true.
Costal, yeah, good,
Costal.
you got that. Right, and so between each of the ribs, we have the intracostal muscles. And so these actually have the power to squish the ribs closer together and reduce the overall volume of the rib cage from the entire scale of the rib cage. Does that make sense? So if all the ribs draw in closer to each other, they're moving closer to the center of like the potential space that you could be taking up and collapsing down the volume that is available in the rib cage.
Sometimes, like, seeing all these photos of, like, just the skeleton makes me forget, like, I was like, wait, there's stuff in between my bones? Like, yes.
Right.
intercostals.
Right.
Yeah, so the
Intercostals.
muscles,
Mhm.
so those are what those muscles are called, the intercostal muscles.
Intercostals, yes.
Those are in between all of the ribs?
Intracostals. Yes. Yes, they are jumping from each rib above and below. There's actually an interior and an exterior set that have a little bit different function, but you'll get into that when you're doing more the hands-on kinesiology side, working your muscle memorization. Yeah, so the intracostal muscles give you a lot of control over
Your exhale.
the available
I always thought it was the diaphragm because when I was a kid, we would do these exercises for theater called hubcaps.
Oh, you're also going to use abdominal muscles. That's a great point.
Okay.
Right, and so like we've got the diaphragm is floating inside there, but then you've also got some muscular power wrapping around the abdomen. So you have these like kind of crisscross, and then you've got like rectus abdominis coming through here. Again, I don't want to like throw all the muscle terms to you at once, but more or less you have this like set of like interwoven structure through the lower belly also. Yeah. And so if you're really clamping all of those muscles down pretty evenly, then that's gonna like squish the intestines basically like up into the bottom of the diaphragm and lift the lungs as well.
A lot going on down
A lot. A lot. Those core muscles.
The exercise you used in theater school for exhaling?
Hubcaps. Hubcaps.
Oh, not those.
That's
too fancy for us.
That was the exercise we did.
Oh, but because that's gonna like, that does the opposite of what we did. Because we did it really slow exhales, like breathing in quickly, and then going as slow as possible, but always gradually feeling it sink down, and that strengthens those specific muscles. Whereas I feel like hubcaps do
It's
like
fast
yeah.
compression
Right.
to get that projection for the theater.
Yes. And we're always working with both strength and coordination, right? That the muscle fibers individually are building up power, but our ability to select what muscle fibers to fire and how much is happening in the nervous system, that coordination is also getting adjusted and improved every time that we activate the muscles. All right. Cool. Well, that brings us basically to our time here. So let's just jump back into the lungs now that we have a little bit more graphic picture of our options with this kind of intro to the respiratory system zone. Okay. So finding ourselves back in the body, finding that wave. Finding the motion of the torso. Just kind of allow yourselves to activate those different muscles and feel the way that it impacts your sense of breath. Activate your neck muscles and watch as you breathe. Different activation there. Allowing your body to write that new coordination. Let the breath roll in and out. And feel the breath and the heartbeat together. And let them relate to each other, the heartbeat and the breath. Best friends forever, always looking out for you. Just send them a little love, send them that care and awareness. Back to the whole body, pop back to the surface of the skin. Pop back into the room, directing your attention. Fresh and ready for lunch.
Mark
Miss
just
those
said-
meditations.
Yeah.
Part is not started.
I'm posting all the videos.
Are you?
I am.
Good.
All of
Ours
them
not
this
started,
time.
so
Yeah.
We should prep once.
It felt
we
so
I need
good.
to
practice.
Every time I try to like concentrate on myself, I'm like, I don't know what to say.
I am trying to make more. I actually wrote a set and I'm like just kind of starting recording them, but it's like a specific like embodiment of anatomical processes sequence. And so I want to just like basically like lay down and just be in the like chillest state so that I've really got my voice doing the thing that is like gonna reverb on the other nervous systems, right? But yeah, I've got a whole YouTube channel.
Good. You
Yeah.
started to-
I have it. Yeah, I have it. It's all go. Yeah.
Is it on your Facebook page?
Yeah, you should be able to get to it. So now.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's at Trans Laboratory. Awesome. Good to see you. I felt amazing after you worked on me yesterday. Yeah, seriously. My client that I went back to, I was like, I sat down and he's like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm massage strong, and it's gonna be great."
It's gonna be a new day today.
Yep. It's a restart halfway. Sweet.